Welcome to Politics Unusual. I'm Morgan McKay. A new poll is out in the New York City mayor's race. So first, we're speaking with the designers of the poll, Carlson and Amit Bagga. Joining us next is Kenny Burgos with the New York Apartment Association to discuss freezing the rent proposals. And then we check in on issues facing New Jersey residents. But first, the new mayoral poll released this week shows the Democratic nominee, Zohran Mamdani, leading by double digits against the other four candidates in the race. So, joining us now is Carlson, founding partner of Zenith Research, and Amit Bagga with Public Progress Solutions. Thank you guys so much for being here. I appreciate it. So you guys really went in depth with this poll. And so both former Governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Eric Adams are really hoping that the other person is going to drop out of the race so they don't split that anti-Zohran Mamdani vote. But you guys found something kind of interesting when you guys did do one-on-one matchups. So you go first. Help explain more.
Yeah, so we conducted a poll of 1,453 registered voters in New York and 1,021 likely voters in New York was a subset of that. And what was unique about this poll is we offered it in 4 languages. It's the largest sample size poll of the general election so far and the second largest of the cycle. And the reason we did that is we really wanted to get into the weeds of the demographic subgroups and the different contours of the city and asking unique questions. So to your point, we asked the 5-way electorate, which is how it's split right now, where Mamdani is leading with 50% of the vote, a very crucial number, followed by Cuomo at 22, and Curtis Sliwa at 13, and Eric Adams back at 7%. Yeah.
And then when you guys did those one-on-one matchups against Andrew Cuomo, if Adams was out of the race, and against Adams if Cuomo was out of the race. And what did you guys find?
Well, we see that even amongst the electorate, if it were to be something like a 2- or 3-person race, Zohran is still in the lead. In the head-to-head matchup, Zohran is ahead, I think, by 2 or 3 points. And, you know, look, every day since November 2016 has taught us to expect the unexpected in politics, including primary night this year here in New York City. But if the field remains the same as it is today, which is 5 ways or even 4, Zohran Mamdani is the next mayor of New York City.
And you guys also really looked at the demographics of likely voters. And what did you guys learn? What was the biggest takeaway that you got from this? And we have actually a graphic of it as well, kind of breaking down just, as you can see, this whole blue areas, all the people that you guys found that would likely vote for Mamdani.
Yes, I mean, as you can see from this chart, a lot of these subgroups are a little smaller, so me taking them as directional. But as you can see, it's pretty overwhelming. And this is a 5-way race. But Mamdani is leading among 70-plus subgroups with a large enough sample size to be confident in, versus a handful for Cuomo and Sliwa. And Adams is leading in none. And I think the most striking finding, and one that we've gotten the most, I think, input on and attention on, is our finding among Jewish voters. So we didn't just ask among Jewish voters, where Mamdani leads by double digits over Cuomo. We asked subsects of the Jewish vote, which isn't often asked. So we asked religious denomination, so whether you're Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, secular, non-practicing, et cetera. And by age as well, we crossed it with age. We found really interesting fault lines, not particularly surprising, but definitely stark, where less observant Jews or Reform Jews were much more likely to support Mamdani, like over 50%. Versus conservative and Orthodox, more likely to support Cuomo and Adams. And then younger Jews were actually one of Mamdani's strongest groups. That's Jews under the age of 45, gave him 67% of likely voters.
Wow. What stood out to you in the demographics that you found?
Sure. Well, a lot has been talked about who Zohran Mamdani's base is, right? So we know younger voters, we know college-educated white voters, obviously South Asians, which is not terribly surprising. But what we see in our poll is that he's really expanded already in just a month the base of his support. A perfect example is black union households, where he leads by 40 points. This is remarkable, right? Unions like NYSNA, 1199, 32BJ have now come out quickly after the primary in support of Zohran Mamdani, and we're seeing that membership of those unions is really showing their support. We also see that Zohran is leading by 30 points amongst Latino voters. That's actually it's actually 52 points, excuse me, among Central and South American voters, many of whom actually voted for Donald Trump. Corona, Queens is the perfect example of this. It's a neighborhood that shifted to the right by 30 points in 2024 and also is supporting Zoran Mamdani by double digits, right? And so we're seeing some really fascinating expansion of the base. Unsurprisingly, Zoran dominates amongst renters and public transit riders by 40 points. But in our five-way matchup, he even, in fact, has a plurality amongst car owners and homeowners, where he leads 10 to 12 points. And so what we're seeing is that across the city, in all boroughs except Staten Island, Zoran Mamdani is in the lead.
When you guys do that one-on-one matchup with them, it seemed like Andrew Cuomo was doing a little bit better than Adams, and that's what some other polls have shown as well. What was the takeaway from that? Well,
look, it's very clear in our poll that likely voters in New York City do not want either Andrew Cuomo or Eric Adams to be their mayor. 68% of respondents in our polls said that they would not consider even voting for Eric Adams. That number is 60% for Andrew Cuomo. And even if you look at the slightly larger universe, right, of registered voters that we polled, that number for Andrew Cuomo is 52%. Meanwhile, only 32% of the respondents that participated in our poll said they would not consider voting for Zoran Mamdani. So what that tells you is that Zoran has even more room to grow his support, whereas Eric Adams and Andrew Cuomo, it looks to us, knowing what we know today, that the hills they have to climb are insurmountable.
Were there any surprises that you guys saw in the poll that took you by surprise?
Yeah, I think for me it was the incredibly low support for Eric Adams. I figured he would be well behind Cuomo, but more competitive with Sliwa in the low teens, but being at 7% of the vote, having, I think it was almost an 80% disapproval rating in the city. Over half of New York likely voters have a strongly unfavorable view of him or strongly disapprove of him. So that's the lowest possible category, not even including the somewhats. So I think that the narrative of the race, both from national media and from interest groups in the city, like big business and big real estate, so far throwing their hat in the with Eric Adams. But from our poll, it looks like they should be backing Andrew Cuomo if they want to get behind someone who actually has a puncher's chance.
And why should people trust this poll? I mean, people have a lot of mistrust, I feel like, for polls. The prior polls showed Cuomo ahead in the primary. Why should people trust this poll?
Well, look, first of all, one of the problems with the polls earlier, prior to the primary, is that they didn't actually anticipate who the electorate was going to be. They didn't really ask questions of younger voters. They barely talked to Asian Americans, who are supporting Zoran Mamdani overall by 52 points. And so we were very intentional about making sure that we were capturing accurately the proportions of the electorate that are represented by younger voters, Asian voters, Latino voters, et cetera. We were incredibly rigorous in our methodology. This poll is completely independent, funded entirely by private donations. And we checked our work with the leading pollsters in the field. Adam can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, we consulted with a couple other pollsters who got it right in the primary, people that I have a lot of respect for, some of my peers. And we also fielded the survey in 4 languages to give people options. We did it in English, we did it in Spanish, simplified Chinese, which caters to Mandarin and Cantonese, and we offered it in Bangla as well to help capture that South Asian community that is so often overlooked and tough, and quite frankly, tough to poll. And we really wanted to make sure we got the percentage of Jews correct, Muslims correct, South Asians, East Asians, and even Puerto Ricans and Dominicans, whereas usually those are just monolithic groups that pollsters look at.
Wow. Well, thank you guys so much. This was a really in-depth poll that you guys did, and I appreciate you guys coming in here to explain it. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
Coming up next, we're taking a look at the housing crisis in New York City and speaking with a guest who says some of the solutions being proposed will only make the issue worse. Welcome back to Politics Unusual. The New York City Rent Guidelines Board just recently approved 3% rent increases for one-year leases and 4.5% for two-year leases for the city's 1 million rent-stabilized apartments. Some say a promise of a rent freeze on rent-stabilized apartments is what helped Zoran Mamdani win the mayoral primary, at least in part. But our next guest is pushing back. So joining us now is Kenny Burgos, who is a former New York State Assembly member and now CEO of the New York Apartment Association, which represents many of the city's landlords, including some of the owners of these rent-stabilized apartments. So thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Morgan.
So, let's start out with this promise of a rent freeze. It's a popular idea, but what are the issues?
Oh, we can talk for a while on the issues, but what people need to understand is this housing is about 40% of the housing market in New York City, and it is struggling and has been struggling since the law changed in 2019. So what Assemblyman Mamdani is attempting to achieve here is affordability by freezing the rent as a blanket freeze across 1 million units, but he doesn't understand the rot that's happening from some of these buildings that are 50, 60, 70 years old and struggling with the finances that have been creeping up, and this is going to mean the end for many of these buildings.
Now, you posted a specific example on social media just the other day, and we're going to show a picture of this. Explain kind of the breakdown of the cost that you were outlining right here from just one of these rent-stabilized apartments.
Yeah, so this is the core problem, right? This is the vacancy problem where many tenants in rent-stabilized housing live in their units for 20, 30, sometimes 40 years. It's very typical. And what happens, these low-rent units will say, like, let's say under $1,000. The law says when that unit comes back online, it effectively has to be rented out at the same amount. But what it's not accounting for is that New York City's code has changed tremendously in 30, 40 years, and even just recently, and it requires sometimes up to $100,000 just to renovate that building and put it back online. So basically what the law is saying, it's asking owners to put in sums of 6 figures many times, and even in the high 5 figures, to lose money for the next 50 years. So not only would a bank never finance it, it would just not make economic sense to put these units back online. So many of them are staying offline. We estimate as high as 50,000 units that are offline right now, and more to come in the midst of a housing crisis, which is just unacceptable.
Now, tenant advocates have been saying that having rent-stabilized apartments, freezing the rent for these rent-stabilized apartments is absolutely necessary to prevent evictions, to make sure that people stay housed. What's been your response?
Absolutely. Listen, the affordability problem is a very real one, and we do not, undermine that at all. But what we say is that housing has costs, and that has to be addressed. And the government can control some of these housing costs, so we can have that conversation. But if we want to talk affordability for specific tenants, there are programs that already freeze the rent programs, right? If you have a voucher, you effectively pay 30% of your income right now to your rent. So whatever the Rent Guidelines Board doesn't matter. You pay the 30% of your income. If you have SCREE or DREE, which are two long-standing rent freeze programs already run by the city, these freeze the tenant's rent at the amount based on their income, and then credits the property owner on their taxes. So it doesn't just blanket freeze the rent, it credits the owner for that cost that has increased. And 170,000 tenants in rent-stabilized housing already have some version of SCREE, DREE, or a voucher. So let's target that affordability, let's target that need. But when you put a blanket freeze on housing that also doesn't have any sort of means testing, when you talk about pre-74 rent-stabilized housing, who are we providing this blanket freeze for? We're just defunding the buildings that sometimes these very vulnerable tenants live in.
So what is the solution? Is it getting rid of rent-stabilized apartments altogether and maybe focusing more on affordable housing, or what do you guys think?
The solution is fixing the 2019 rent laws, which caused the overwhelming problem happening here in rent-stabilized housing. The next piece that we want to talk about affordability, and I'm happy to talk with any mayor that wants to do this, is addressing the cost of housing. The property taxes are 1/3 of the expense in operating multifamily housing. Water, fuel, labor, these have all been increasing at rates much higher than the Rent Guidelines Board 3% increase. So when you compound these increases that are coming year over year, you are squeezing these buildings that are capped at revenue, and they're going to become insolvent very, very soon. And again, I remind you, 1 million units in a city of 2.3 million rentals, this has a cascading effect on the entire housing market. It is not a secret that what happens in rent-stabilized housing affects market rate housing, affects the entire city, affects the tax base. Like, this is huge complications we're talking about here. This is not just a few apartments.
Now, the latest data available I found shows that New York City's rent-stabilized unit landlords' profits were up about 8% from 2022 to 2023, adjusting for inflation. But I think you have said in the past it's smaller owners that are more impacted.
First, I'll push back on the word profit, right? The number you're pulling from is from the Rent Guidelines Board, and they're talking about NOI. That's net operating income. That's a reflection of the building's health. And that is one number that, again, captures 1 million rent-stabilized units. The problem is the data is a bit muddled, if you will, right? Because what happens is you have Manhattan, core Manhattan, that is completely divorced from what's happening in the Bronx, what's happening in Brooklyn. You also have these new buildings, what people will know as sort of the affordable housing websites, that are also rent stabilized, that are in complete different financial scenarios than the older pre-1974 buildings that I talk about. So when you average in all these numbers, it is like averaging in, you know, a couple of workers who make $50,000 a year and then a few millionaires in Manhattan and say, well, the average New Yorker makes $250,000 a year. So it's just not a reflective number of what's actually happening across New York City. And this is why this process becomes political. This is why this process is not actually addressing the housing problem that we have across this city.
The New York Apartment Association donated, I think it was like $2.5 million to the super PAC backing Cuomo in the primary. Have you guys chosen a candidate to support in the general election?
Again, just to fix, so we didn't donate to a super PAC. We had our own independent expenditure helping the candidate, but that was during the primary. Right now, it's a five-way race. The general election is an entirely different scenario. Assemblyman Mamdani is obviously the Democratic nominee, which, you know, has a huge advantage. So we're really surveying the field. This race really doesn't heat up, if you will, until September. So as of right now, we have to see what pans out. But as it stands, it looks like Assemblyman Mamdani is poised to win the election. So we are operating on that premise.
Well, it's been such a pleasure to see you again. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. We're going to have to be back very soon.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
As we continue on Politics Unusual, paying more for power. We're hearing from New Jersey residents about yet another rate hike. We're taking the pulse of the people. In this week's Pulse of the People, we're hearing now from New Jersey residents who are a bit frustrated about another potential rate hike on their electric bills. The state's electrical grid operator recently announced that customers' bills will likely rise by 5% next summer. That's on top of a 20% increase that went into effect this year. Many Democrats across the state are voicing their frustrations with the grid operator, claiming mismanagement is to blame for the rising costs, while Republicans say failed policies by Governor Murphy are the cause. Here's what Garden State residents had to say.
It's ridiculous. It's absurd. I mean, I'm already paying $1,200. I've had PSE&G come down to my house like 3 or 4 times because I just don't believe that I'm using that much electricity. And every time they're like, no, it's the meter, it's the meter. And now they're increasing me 20%. I feel like I'm going to be paying my mortgage and the amount I'm paying on my electricity bill.
Everything goes up, unfortunately. As long as the product is better, if you're going to raise anything, I expect an improvement on it.
I think it's another form of taxation without representation. I do not understand how they are allowed to raise our rates that high without any justified reason for it.
Now to a hot button issue here in the city. The NYPD is cracking down on cyclists across the 5 boroughs. New York City cyclists received 10 times as many criminal summonses in the second quarter of 2025. It's all part of the NYPD's new initiative tied to street safety. Bike advocates call the enforcement unfair to cyclists. Here's what New Yorkers had to say.
The bike riders?
Yes.
Yeah, they don't think that the traffic lights apply to them.
They're law followers and they're non-law followers. So I feel like that's in every different types of circles.
They're not stopping, especially if I'm crossing. They will just run you over.
I mean, I think the majority of people are following the rules. I think that sometimes, like there are motorists that run red lights that I see all the time too. Like there are people that jaywalk. Like I think it's an issue, but I don't think it's like the #1 issue facing our city.
And we'll continue to check in with people across our area in the coming weeks. Next up, we're going to be testing your knowledge of the tri-state region. So stay with us as we take a look at some political history. And a quick programming note: tune in to Fox 5's new show, Battleground NYC, the fight for your vote, where we are following the latest up-to-minute information on the race for New York City Mayor. The show is hosted by S.E. Cupp on our Fox local app and streams every weeknight at 7 p.m. from now until Election Day. Now to a political flashback from this week in history. On August 1st, 1776, a committee was formed to formulate a government for New York State, and was chaired by that guy right there, Abraham Yates of Albany. Finally, tonight we're testing your knowledge. Last week, we asked you, the largest cemetery in the United States is located in which borough? The answer? Calvary Cemetery in Maspeth and Woodside, Queens. It was officially opened in 1848 and spans 365 acres. More than 3 million people are estimated to be buried there, including former New York Governor Alfred E. Smith and former Mayor Hugh Grant. Now, to this week's question. Most people know that New York was originally called New Amsterdam, but in 1673, it was renamed as what for only a year? Now, don't Google the answer, but if you want to take a shot at it, go ahead and scan the code on your screen right there. That's going to take you to our website, fox5ny.com. You can write in your answer and then check back here next week to see if you're right. That does it for this episode of Politics Unusual. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Morgan McKay. We look forward to having you guys all back here next week.